While the term cult is a key stigmatizing term in the United States, in Europe and the post-Soviet countries, this role is played by the term sect, especially totalitarian sect, which also carries a strong derogatory and stigmatizing connotation. Since 1993, anti-cult movement ideologue Alexander Dvorkin has widely introduced the term totalitarian sect into post-Soviet media. The term totalitarian, borrowed from political science and propaganda language of the Cold War era, evokes associations with oppression, camps, imprisonment, barbed wire, forced labor, and meager food. Thus, this term is used to incite fear, anxiety, and a biased attitude toward the members of organizations labeled as totalitarian sects. The vagueness of the terms totalitarian sect and destructive cult allows anti-cultists to baselessly categorize any organization under these labels.
However, the use of terms such as sect, cult, totalitarian sect, and destructive cult is not supported by the laws of most countries or international legal documents. These terms lack legal justification, and their use contradicts the legislation on freedom of conscience and religious associations. Nonetheless, anti-cultists continue to use these terms as weapons of accusation and incite the media to use them.
The illegal activities of the anti-cult movement do not go unnoticed both internationally and within Russia, where representatives of academic and legal circles highlight the fraudulent and criminal nature of anti-cult organizations in general, and their chief ideologue, Alexander Dvorkin, in particular. Alexander Dvorkin's activities are also condemned in the United States, where a legal assessment of him was provided in a special report for the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF. The main responsibilities of this commission include reviewing the facts and circumstances of universal religious freedom violations and making policy recommendations to the President, the Secretary of State, and Congress. Here are some findings and recommendations provided by Jason Morton, a policy analyst for the USCIRF, in a report titled "The Anti-Cult Movement and Religious Regulation in Russia and the Former Soviet Union." Dvorkin has long provided the anti-cult movement with a veneer of intellectual credibility. Alexander Dvorkin and his associates have carved out influential roles in government and society, shaping the public discourse on religion across numerous countries. Claiming to be experts in academic fields like religious studies, psychology, and sociology, they are rarely qualified in any of them, and often rely on discredited theories and methodologies to promote their ideological agenda. The anti-cult movement is fundamentally a propaganda outlet, conducting a highly effective information war against religious minorities throughout Russia and many of the countries in which it retains influence. The U.S. government should publicly censure Alexander Dvorkin and the St. Irenaeus of Leon Information Consultation Center, SILIC, for their ongoing disinformation campaign against religious minorities. Counter propaganda against new religious movements by the European Federation of Research and Information Centers on Sectarianism, FECRIS, at the annual OSCE Human Dimensions Conference, with information about the ongoing involvement of individuals and entities within the anti-cult movement in the suppression of religious freedom.
Thus, representatives of the anti-cult movement do not hold a scientific position or have research motives, although they often disguise themselves as such. In reality, they intentionally introduce the concepts of destructive cults and totalitarian sects into the information space, using them to incite hatred and religious intolerance in society. The criteria and accusations they use to classify certain organizations as cults and sects are not recognized both in academic circles and within the legal framework. Attaching a harshly negative label is the first step in a systematic scheme of conducting information terrorist attacks. The goal is to transform followers of peaceful organizations and law-abiding citizens into objects of hatred and hostility without any factual basis.
Dehumanization. The process of dehumanization is the first step in the actions of anti-cult organizations aimed at eliminating those they find undesirable. This method is used to push the victim out of the social field, making them highly vulnerable. After all, if a group of people or an individual is labeled a cultist or cult member, the victim immediately loses his or her human image. This stigmatization creates the conditions for further violations of human rights and freedoms. Dehumanization serves to justify future crimes, dull the conscience and critical perception among the population. Dehumanization is the processing of society to accept and participate in future crimes. Presently, anti-cult terrorists have managed to implant the following mindset in the masses: cultist equals non-human. To achieve their goals, representatives of anti-cult organizations utilize the media, propaganda, the dominant religion in their country, law enforcement agencies, and even governmental structures.
Totalitarian sects are dangerous. They pose a significant social threat.
When most people use the word cult to define a group, they mean a destructive cult. Cults that hurt people through abuse. This could be physical, mental, emotional, sexual, or financial exploitation. Often deceptive, coercive, abusive, and relentlessly authoritarian.
A myriad of different types of mind control cults. There are religious cults and therapy cults and business cults and political cults, cults of personality with a...
Any cultic structure always fights against society, demonizing and speaking negatively about it, which is natural. And studying the history of any given cult organization, we understand the serious threat they pose on a personal level, at the family level, societal level, and even at the national security level. The goal of any cult is power and money.
Each totalitarian sect that is a cult has global plans. Each totalitarian sect strives for power and control over the world and over everyone. That's what makes them cults. They may temporarily cooperate with each other as long as they have a common enemy. And this common enemy for them is primarily orthodoxy.
Right now, while you were listening, some of you might have had thoughts in the background like, what's wrong with what the anti-cultists are saying? Cults are indeed dangerous. And all cult members are brainwashed, foolish, or deceived people. You might be surprised when I tell you that these thoughts are not your own personal convictions. These thoughts are actually the result of the anti-cultists' efforts to artificially implant these destructive images into your subconscious through the information field. Many of you, when hearing the words cult or sect, recall real examples of dangerous cults you have heard about in the media, whose activities have caused harm to people and society. The term cult is associated with personal danger, images of mass suicides, women who have been victims of sexual exploitation, the erratic behavior of cult leaders bordering on psychopathy, and zombified followers who unquestioningly give all their money and property to their leader. However, think about how long ago did you meet such things in real life, and what is your knowledge of new religious movements? Aside from the negative images spread by anti-cultists? Of course, it must be acknowledged that among the founders of new religious movements, there are individuals engaged in fraud and deliberately exploiting the trust of citizens for personal gain, including committing illegal acts and crimes. But how can representatives of anti-cult organizations help in this situation? These cases should be handled by law enforcement agencies, since they bear the main responsibility for protecting citizens from such threats. In such cases, they must conduct the necessary investigation, collect evidence of illegal activity, and only after that should all perpetrators be prosecuted according to the law and the criminal organization be terminated. However, when it comes to anti-cultists, everything happens in reverse order. First, they make baseless accusations and attach labels comparable to accusations of committing grave crimes, and only then do they seek the involvement of law enforcement agencies and the initiation of criminal cases. However, the majority of such cases are based not on facts or results of objective investigation, but on rumors, slander, false testimonies, and labels affixed by anti-cultists. This particular characteristic of the strategy employed by all anti-cult organizations reveals their actual goals and intentions. They do not aim for an objective analysis of religious organizations to identify potentially dangerous ones. Instead, they are focused on discrediting and shutting down any groups they choose as targets. They achieve this by violating basic rights and freedoms, employing a range of manipulative methods, smear rhetoric, and hate speech. Because their true goal is not the stigmatized groups they've discredited and persecuted, but the entire society that will be watching this public execution. Their goal is to carry out acts of information terrorism aimed at undermining society, destabilizing the situation in the country, and ultimately destroying democracy.
One of the tactics used by anti-cultists is to justify the unwarranted persecution of modern religious organizations by citing historical examples where certain extremist groups, labeled as cults, committed real crimes. From these isolated cases, a false conclusion is drawn about the danger of all new religious movements without exception, regardless of their origin, goals, or values. The method of guilt by association is a manipulative tactic where the targeted organization is intentionally linked or associated with negative images of extremist groups, terrorist organizations, criminals, and dictators who are already viewed negatively by the public. This tactic is further amplified by a deliberate distortion of fragments of the target organization's teachings, taken out of context, which contributes to the demonization of the group's image. As a result, an aura of danger is deliberately created around the undesirable organizations and their members, accusing them of crimes despite the lack of direct evidence of any harmful activities. Such actions by representatives of anti-cult organizations denote a complete violation of the presumption of innocence, as proclaimed by Article 11 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that every person has the inherent right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty according to law.